I didn't take over neighborhoods. I didn't, there was no chop shop.
Anybody know where I can buy a hot Mercedes?
Well, they always gotta like exaggerate a few of the details to make the movie more exciting for the audience. Hey guys, was the Mark Dacascos classic Only the Strong based on a true story? Well, maybe. In today's video, we got Luis Esteban, co-writer. He was more than just co-writer, he was actually on set the entire time and helped in a lot of different facets of the production. So, really interesting video here. This is a multi-part series interview, and there may even be a future for Only the Strong. So that we'll talk about that later. But in this video, basically, we're going to give you the true origin, starting with Lewis's story on when he lived in New York, how he even got into Hollywood. And you'll see how all these guys met, they were interconnected, and it led to Lewis eventually meeting Sheldon. And then basically it's a very fascinating history and an example of like how sometimes all these pieces just fall into place by the different people you meet, and etc. And then you get like a martial arts classic like Only the Strong out of it. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoy this effort. If you do, please support the channel, hit the like button, subscribe, and share the video.
Mark Dacascos and Sheldon Lettich are like, you better do this interview, Mr. Only the Strong silent partner. So here I am.
Of course, yeah, you got to. And we got to dig really in deep with that. But just to start, Lewis, like, how did you even get involved in Hollywood in the film world anyway? Because that's not something like a lot of people necessarily do, or at least not for decades like you've done.
Right. Since I was a kid, man, I worked at an auto parts store and saved up money enough to buy a little Nikon matte 35 millimeter camera. Okay. I was always into photography and visuals and that sort of thing. So at the age of 13, that's it. That's all she wrote. I had a camera. I would shoot things. I would go around the city and do all kinds of stuff. Filmmaking was always my path. It just really was. It wasn't anything other than I love everything about it. I've everything about it. So that was the beginning of diving into making things.
Real quick, Lewis, was there like a specific movie or TV show that really kind of made you fall in love with it, or?
Not really. There were films that stood out, like Chariots of Fire. I was into track in high school, cross-country track.
Okay.
So this is several years, just a few years after I got my first camera. No, it was just one of these things that really, I didn't study filmmakers. I wasn't a big Scorsese fan or anything like that. It was just something that was natural for me. It was an expression. Sure. I loved music, but I couldn't play any instruments. And, we all had to work. And by all of us, I mean, my mom, my stepdad, everybody was working. So for me, it wasn't like someone influenced me into it. It just really was a natural interest. It just, I loved it.
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes you just know, you can't like necessarily articulate it. I mean, you fall in love with certain things, like me with fitness or martial arts. It's just like, I mean, there's certain reasons, but at the end of the day, it's like, you can't really describe it sometimes. You just love it or you don't.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why, part of the reason why I think we're on this planet, to hopefully find and discover those things. And it's very important for people.
Yeah. That makes life a little bit more fulfilling. Maybe even you're able to cope with other things when you can find something that you're passionate about.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what led to a lot of things after I got into filmmaking.
But you didn't grow up in LA or California though, right? You were like on the East Coast, I think, weren't you?
I grew up, we moved quite a bit. We lived in what was called Spanish Harlem. We lived in the now infamous Washington Heights, thanks to Lin-Manuel Miranda's work. We lived in the South Bronx. We lived in Yonkers. We lived in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, but it was mostly New York City.
Sure.
So that was my playground. And the New York City that I grew up in was not a very pretty sight.
Yeah, that was like in the 70s, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, a lot of crime, which I'm guessing that's probably why you started training in martial arts.
No.
No?
No. Martial arts to me, it was a journey of exploration. I was adept at fighting and forms and that kind of thing. I went to several tournaments and I did okay. You know, I was never like some of my friends who really are into, you know, fighting and that sort of thing. For me, it was an exploration of ideas. So for me, Bruce Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do really spoke to me quite a bit because it was really about, he was really into philosophy and filmmaking. That's how I saw Bruce Lee. I didn't see him as this super, you know, tough guy. I saw him as a man who was living in a difficult time, and he was torn between, you know, his childhood home where he was born in China, and then this America that he loved, but he wasn't necessarily welcome, you know, as an actor, because it just wasn't quite the right time.
Yeah, not for Asian Americans. Definitely
not for Asian Americans. Yeah.
When he came here,
it seemed like everybody else had a something of a shot, you know, at doing things, good or bad, right? But Asian Americans and Bruce Lee really, he just loved cinema. Maybe because he grew up around it. He was a child actor, right? As many of your fans may or may not know. So I was much more into that. Let's explore the philosophy, the history of martial arts. I was into what made people noble, you know, honor, things like that. So the martial arts, I thought, was a way of exploring that. You know, let me explore these concepts of nobility, of defending others who couldn't defend themselves. That was really the thing. Self-defense, honestly, that was the last thing on my mind, because at the end of the day, the people who got into fights usually ended up grappling, right? So it wasn't like a very stylized thing.
And a lot of times the martial arts, real quick, Lewis, are thrown out the window. And that was even showcased in the first UFC match. It's like you get this 5th degree Kenpo black belt, and all of a sudden he's just like a drunk dude brawling at a bar, flailing his arms. You know, it's like, what are your techniques, man? That's it.
Almost every single fight that I've observed, or thank God I haven't been in many of them, but the few skirmishes that I was in, it always, you know, became a grappling match. Somebody was choking somebody else out. It rarely was a stand, you know, let's.
Yeah, it does not look like the movies.
No, not at all. So self-defense, we all knew going in that, you know, you have to strike first, strike fast, and get it over with as quickly as possible.
Karate Kid, there you go.
That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
So, and for me, that just, you know, so self-defense was something that your mom could do. Right, like if your mom
with the right attitude, that's the most important thing. That vicious attitude, you know, the animal instinct.
Yeah,
that's more important than like karate kicks.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So, how did you end up in California and Hollywood then? So you're in New York, right? And then you eventually do end up in California, though.
Yes, because California at that time, maybe much more so than now, was like the center of filmmaking, right? Like you had to go to California, you had to come here in order to meet the people that could help you make films. But I waited a while. You know, I had a business, I was married, I had a daughter, and so I couldn't quickly and easily just pick up and go.
Sure.
Eventually I did, and it was a very difficult decision, but because it's difficult, it's hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
But I came out here with a very specific purpose, and that purpose was to see what it took in order to become a professional filmmaker in the feature film narrative world. I already had a business in New York. I was doing travel films for a very,
so you already shooting
early
stuff in New York, and
yeah, there's stuff that New York, you know, still had a community. It had a filmmaking community. I worked at NYU, and you know, computer science department.
Okay.
Back when the internet was like, you know, for professors and students only.
Sure.
Right? It was a very new thing. But it was fascinating. You know, I met a lot of really cool people. But I did get an opportunity to see and hear film students and professors and that sort of thing. And so I felt that there was a lot of theory, not a lot of practicality about filmmaking. So Los Angeles was very clearly the arena to enter.
Definitely.
If you really were serious about it. So I gave myself 1 year.
Okay. Wow, that's it. Just 1 year.
1 year, because not being able to enter the world of Hollywood filmmaking didn't mean that I couldn't make films. It just meant, okay, well, this place is not for me, because I always felt like you never know how much time you have on earth, so don't
Yeah.
waste it, that kind of thing. I felt I'm going to try it. I'm going to see what's what. I'm going to go prepared. Like I actually took several flights here to California to just kind of get almost like a recon mission, right?
Oh, that's cool. That's funny.
Yeah, like who are these people? How do they think? I've read about them in books, and what are they like in reality?
Mhm.
Back then, I guess I seemed like an anomaly because I actually came prepared. I had like stuff that I had shot on 60 millimeter film. I wasn't, uh, overly impressed, should I
Okay.
say, with the establishment. It's like, it's men and women, young people, older people, all doing what they do best, craftsmen. Right? So that's how I saw filmmaking. Filmmaking for me was always an of course thing. It was my calling. It was my vocation. It wasn't
Real
anything
quick,
that I.
Lewis, as you were kind of, preparing and flying out there and doing your recon work, did you meet certain people that would help you when you eventually moved, or did you not get the network going just yet?
There was no network. I wasn't going to the parties. What I was doing was taking meetings with agents and managers, and they were quite curious about me. That was for sure. But it wasn't until I had a real connection with someone in LA, and that person was Louis Venosta, the writer of The Last Dragon.
Oh, he wrote Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
The Last Dragon was based on his script. Louis Venosta was the writer. Louis Venosta was actually, he was pretty well established. He had like a 3-picture deal at Universal.
Wow.
He wrote Bird on a Wire, which was a Mel Gibson movie.
Yeah, sure. I remember that.
Very high end, So Louis Venosta was like,
yeah, he's doing A-list movies with
he's doing
actors,
A-list movies. And there was nothing low budget about The Last Dragon. I mean, The Last Dragon.
Oh, that's an amazing film.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great
it's a brilliant piece of work, actually, when you really think about it. And a lot of that is because Louis Venosta really understood how to cut through the noise and the dust and the madness of the martial arts world. And the whole thing was very similar to what I was describing earlier, where it's like, here's all the noise, right? The master, and everybody's looking for a master, and everybody's looking for this and that. But what does it really mean to be a master? So we can get into all of that later if you want to get into just The Last Dragon. But
Sure.
Taimak introduced me to Louis Venosta. He said, hey, I've got, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, this guy's the real deal. He's a writer. I can have conversations with him. And Louis Venosta introduced me to Lawrence Bender, who was the producer of Quentin Tarantino's The Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction.
And he had that part in Lionheart, of course, too.
Yes, he did.
I can fucking kick this guy's ass. See this shit, man?
I know, baby.
Right now, you and me.
Yes, he did, because he was a friend of Sheldon's.
That's
so that
cool.
was the path. It was Taimak introduces me to Louis Venosta. Louis Venosta introduces me to Lawrence. I end up being roommates with Lawrence, so I was able to observe Reservoir Dogs and all of that stuff
That's
firsthand.
cool. Real quick, Lewis. And of course, it's always who you know, and everybody's connected to another person. But I have to ask, how did you meet Taimak?
Taimak was working on a short film with a colleague. His name was Damien Lichtenstein. And Damien Lichtenstein he has a business out here in Los Angeles as well. It's a filmmaker. Okay. He has a post-production co-financing company now, I think. But Damien was working on a film with Taimak. This is after The Last Dragon, a few years after.
Interesting.
Late 80s, right? And early 90s. And he and I hit it off. We met, and then I was working on a short film with Taimak, which I acted in only because I didn't want to put anybody else through the ordeal of a no-budget production. Yeah. But I'm not an actor.
Oh, so you never wanted to be an actor, but you just did a couple roles because
I did it because I knew what I needed to accomplish, and I've always had the sense of if I can't afford to pay somebody for their skills and what they know, don't invite people into that madness. Like figure it out, do what you need to do.
Sure.
Understand what your objective is, present it, and then bring other people in as you can pay them. Okay. Why take advantage of people's time unless you can pay them? There's nothing wrong with paying people. So if I couldn't pay, if I didn't have the budget for something, I just did it myself. And because I had practiced enough martial arts, I had really good teachers, I had really good experiences, I kind of had a sense of action, I liked action films like The Warriors. There's one that was a big influence.
Sure, yeah, from the
Warriors.
70s New York.
When
Yeah.
I was a kid, I actually witnessed the filming of that opening scene with all the gangbangers where you hear the one dude go, "Can you dig it?"
Can you dig it?
That was shot in 96th Street, West Side Park in Manhattan. I saw that being filmed as a kid.
Wow.
So yeah, that was influential.
Sure.
It looked really crazy on film, but it was very highly organized. It was very organized. Like if you turn off the volume on the Warriors and you just watch it, you will see people actually following a path.
Okay.
Like there's a very, very well-defined path that all these bodies had to go through.
Sure.
And it's a fun exercise for filmmakers.
Interesting. Okay, so basically it was Timac, then the writer of The Last Dragon, and then Lawrence Bender, and then Sheldon Lettich.
Right.
Okay, so you met Sheldon, like when and how did the Only the Strong come up?
Lawrence invited me to a dinner that he was going to have with a friend of his, Sheldon Lettich. And so we did. We met at this really nice restaurant. And one thing led to the next. And Sheldon is a former Marine. I'm a former Marine. I served in the Marine Corps as well. So we had that in common.
Oh, sure.
I wasn't necessarily a fan of Bloodsport. I hadn't even seen it. I hadn't seen. Sheldon at the time was in the process of post-production for Double Impact, I believe.
Oh, yeah, that's an amazing film. That's cool.
Right. So this is many, many years ago. So I'm not getting all the details correct. If you give me, enough time, I can pinpoint.
I mean, you're talking 30 years ago, which is
yeah, it was a while back. So what I did remember was I liked Sheldon immediately because here's a guy that was already there. Like Lawrence told me, hey, look, Sheldon would host parties at his house with people like Quentin Tarantino, Sam Raimi, Boaz Yakin. I mean, you name it. People.
Oh,
Sheldon
yeah,
was
he had
guy.
all the connections. He had the network.
Sheldon was the man. Like before Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, which no one expected to be the cult hit that it became, Sheldon was already an established, I would say action, not martial arts thing, because Sheldon never studied martial arts. He didn't have to. He understood film, right? So we had a lot in common. He was a photographer before he started directing these movies. I was always into the magic of photography, right? So for me, it was always a magical thing. So the Marine Corps, we had that in common. And then eventually we talked about what we did after our time serving. And then I spoke about this little program where I took at-risk inner city kids and taught them martial arts in an effort to try to help them become better students in school. It was not about teaching them to be martial artists. It was about, let me teach you a few things about how to calm your anger, about these sorts of things. Again, at-risk kids. And there's a reason why I selected them.
Now, real quick, Louis, that's a great thing about martial arts. It's not just, I initially got into it because, I was inspired by these movies, but for self-defense reasons, there are a lot of bigger kids in school, and I felt the threat, and I'll just put it that way. But it transcends that, and you realize how much it adds to an individual's development. It's not about the karate kicks and everything. That stuff's cool, but there's so much more. But basically, where you're going with this is Only the Strong is, I guess, at least loosely based on a true story, which is your story.
Very loosely.
Okay.
I didn't take over neighborhoods. I didn't, there was no chop shop.
Anybody know where I can buy a hot Mercedes?
Well, they always gotta exaggerate a few of the details to make the movie more exciting for the audiences. I mean, you see that with Dragon the Bruce Lee story.
That's a very important thing to understand. Sheldon already had knowledge of a lot of the usual plot points, right? You killed my parents, I'm going to kill your entire country. That kind of thing in martial arts and action films. You mess with my family, I'm going to torture you in ways you can't even imagine. That kind of thing. Sheldon was more interested in, so you taught inner city kids, and at the time, I think maybe we were more attuned to that. We had films like Stand By Me, The Principal, movies like that, where we were trying to figure out how do we reach kids, right? What's the role of education in the life of kids? And I was always into that. I was always into what is your experience like as a human being? How do you become better? How do you deal with less than favorable circumstances, whether you're in an inner city or whether you were raised in rural, on a farm? It's like, how do you get through life was really it. And Sheldon and I, really, that was the origin of Only the Strong, which was, okay, well, that's interesting. You're going to teach kids martial arts. On a business level, that made sense. Okay, martial arts, right? Mm-hmm. We were Japanese crazy in the late 80s, early 90s. Everything was
huge market.
Ninja Samurai.
Its own section in the video store just for martial arts. So yeah, huge.
That's thing. Right. That's right. So Sheldon, felt this is different. Mm-hmm. This is unique. So the program was real. The objective was very, very sincere. I really, really wanted to try to reach kids who they were not going to be very responsive to things like study hard. In many cases, the reason a lot of these kids did things on the streets, drug dealing or drug use or any number of things, is because their home life was anything but good.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like, so how do you tell somebody like that? I observed this firsthand. My home life was fine. I didn't have any craziness. We were poor, but there was no sense of we were poor when I was growing up. It was just like, this is life. But I knew a lot of people who were involved in gangs or who were involved in drugs and that sort of thing. And when I was growing up in New York City, I was always sad about the homeless. Like, how does somebody reach that level of despair, in life? How do you become homeless?
What's interesting too, like the sad thing is, and I know I'm not the only one, but when you think of like a homeless person and you see them and you define and put that label on them, they're almost in a way like subhuman.
Yes.
Unfortunately. And I feel bad thinking of that, but trust me, that's how society looks at them. Oh, you're homeless. It's almost like you're subhuman in a lot of ways. It's sad.
Hey, man, I ain't got no change, man.
Yeah. And for me, to this day, I look at homeless people and I still look at adults and I think about, what were you like as a child? What happened? What led to all of these things?
Yeah.
So at the time, to get back to Only the Strong, what Sheldon and I were like, okay, well, this is a unique way of utilizing martial arts as something positive, not something necessarily to rip somebody's throat out or impose your will on somebody else. It was about, this is interesting. Here's a man who served his country, saw some really powerful things as we opened the film with, Mark Dacascos' character and Mr. Amen. And there's nothing bad about it. It's like this moment of joy that they have, in the Froda, in the circle.
Love the beginning of that film.
Yeah, and that's something you really haven't seen in a lot of films. And that came later, but the whole idea was we knew that we wanted to tell a positive story. We wanted to have the takeaway of the audience be, I don't have to accept everything around me. I don't have to accept despair. I don't have to be that way. You're not going to reach everybody, but at least I wanted to see if maybe we could get their attention with martial arts and then plant some seeds that these kids could then grow up with later on. Mm-hmm. And those seeds were not, this is how you destroy somebody, but those seeds were something as simple as discipline, something as simple as if somebody's coming at you, stay calm. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you're going to get hit, you're going to get cut, but stay calm and your chances are better of walking away from that confrontation. That's on a purely physical level. On the mental level, it was like, your life is very challenging. You have brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, when they are around, who are maybe less than perfect. And so how do you cope with that? How do you cope with teachers that have no clue what your home life is like? Sure. That's where that line of Orlando's character in the film, is like, what are you going to teach us? When he has this outburst.
Well, what are we going to learn, huh? What are you going to teach us? How to play your poha bongo drums and dance around like little viados? You're a loser, man.
Oh, sure.
We were leading up to that. There were some very carefully crafted moments in the film where we knew that there were certain points we wanted to get across. How do you reach these kids? What are you going to teach them? What do you do when their world imposes, the educational world? And all of these things, but we had to do it in a way, and Sheldon knew exactly how to do it. We had to do it in a way that would make sense for a narrative, for a feature-length film. right? Because a lot of the things that I'm talking about now can be very heady, even like the things about honor, nobility, and utilizing martial arts, not even for self-defense, but to defend other people. Was really the thing. To me, what was really impressive was, let's say you have the power to really hurt others, but you don't. You use it to defend other people.
Sure.
That was fascinating. So eventually that grew into what became Only the Strong.
The movie was just very smart and well crafted, and people watching it, teens, they could put themselves, some of the troubled teens, in some of the characters' shoes and say, movies like that are important because they do reach a certain audience that I think needs them. So like the characters that change in the film, I'm telling you, I guarantee there are a lot of people who change their lives because of a film like that, in that film specifically. Yeah. And they seen themselves as, it was like the Orlando character. They probably, bettered their life in many ways. So, I mean, the film is entertaining. It's a martial arts film, but it's so much more than that. And that's one thing that, like you said, Sheldon Lettich isn't a martial artist, but he understands filmmaking and storytelling. And that's why his films in the martial arts genre are so much better than most films in the martial arts genre.
Yeah, I always thought that was fascinating with Sheldon, because here's a guy that's like, classic martial arts films. Yeah. And the guy is more of a historian in my mind. Like if you go to his study and you see his study, you go to his office, basically. I mean, the walls are lined with history books, not martial, it's like he doesn't, his trade publications are not Black Belt Illustrated and Kung Fu. It's like, this man's a historian.
That's funny.
If you have conversations with him about any aspect of history, not just military history, which he's very, very well versed in, like engagements that we've had, 1776, what launched America. Like he can speak about the history of the Marine Corps like no one I'd ever met.
That's cool.
Right? And these are important things to him. The guy's super smart. You can actually see that in his films. Lionheart, Double Impact were also, like Only the Strong, not so much films about the martial arts, but there was this certain sense of, social commentary. There was a lot of that in his films. Only the Strong was his opportunity, I believe, to do something that was even further removed from what Jean-Claude Van Damme was building his career on, right? Which was tough guy, and I'm going to hand. But even Jean-Claude is also another guy. I think if he had a choice, I don't think he would have been a martial arts superstar. I think in his mind, he would have been just a rock solid actor.
And that's what he wanted to do, and what he was going in that direction with, like, Nowhere to Run. Like it, the thing is, it's like you have an audience that expects something. And even if we got him in a very dramatic performance or a comedy, it's like, well, can you at least do a couple spin kicks and knock someone out? They just expect that and want to see it, But, I don't think people like to be put in a box. Especially if you're an actor. It's like, well, let me act. We know Jean-Claude could do comedy. We know he could do drama. But again, it's like the way they got to market him and sell him. There's so many people that just want to see him do spin kicks.
And he fought it. He fought really hard. JC is who I'm talking about. I mean, there's a reason why he became this icon. Because he really cared about what he was doing. There was something about him. Like if you take any moment in time, which is why I love stills. Stills are amazing. It's like a moment in time, even if it's a still from a movie, 24 frames, right? Grab a frame and watch him. He's thinking very carefully about what he's doing. And it's not just about showing the muscles. That was something that had to be done at the time. I think a lot of that was about, this is the time that I'm in, and there's only one way that I can break through. And people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone have paved the way and created the path for everybody else. It's like you had to be a certain way in order to get attention. Not that there's anything in any way, shape, or form wrong with any of these endeavors. These are all highly competitive art forms, bodybuilding and all of these things.
I mean, it's fine if that's who you are. Absolutely.
So Jean-Claude was very smart about that. Sheldon was very smart about that. It shows in their films. But if you really analyze Lionheart, Double Impact, it's about a much bigger story, than purely beating people up. These are beat points, plot points that needed to be handled. and needed to be handled well. Only the Strong, I think, was Sheldon's opportunity to explore that even more, because there was a lot of social commentary about, you can go on and on and on about Darwinian theory and this and that, and natural lines come out like,
Yo, Kerrigan, I got your natural selection, my man. How about I naturally select to walk out of this boring-ass classroom?
that's another line from the film. All of these things are just to explore what we normally think about. We can hear people lecture us till we can't take it anymore.
Sure.
And a lot of these kids, these things were just not connecting. So Sheldon, again, he took all of these things and figured out these are the plot points of a martial arts film. These are the plot points of an action film. But somehow, some way, we're really into this social commentary of how people learn and what they do with that information. Capoeira was a whole different thing.
Oh, let's get into that in a second.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Lewis, and I don't think it's a coincidence. For whatever reason, with Bloodsport and Lionheart and Double Impact and even Only the Strong, which I want to talk about related to this in a second, I think Frank Dukes added something with Lettich. Like, for whatever reason, when Frank was involved, like whether Sheldon wants to admit it or not, he made his best films, and I don't think that was a coincidence. So, with that said, I've talked to Sheldon, of course, and he gives Frank credit for Bloodsport. He gives him credit for Lionheart, not so much on Double Impact, and really not so much on Only the Strong. Now, in your experience, because you co-wrote the film with Sheldon and you were on set the whole time, like, what was your experience with Frank on Only the Strong, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah.